Hello everyone, Phreak here. Welcome to patch 8.23 and my rundown of it. Hopefully I do a good job on this one. It is the preseason patch. We've been looking forward to it for quite a while, and it is deceptively small yet deceptively large. It is changing the most fundamental framework of the game in that it's changing minions and it's changing turrets. And that means all of game pacing is being tossed around, moved aside, pushed in different directions. And because game pacing is different, different styles of champions are going to succeed and fail. More than individual champion buffs or nerfs could ever do, something's going to happen to Jace, something's going to happen to Zyra, something's going to happen to Zed. And none of us are going to know for sure exactly what it's going to mean, but we're certainly going to see some day one win rates spike up and down by a lot because there's going to be classifications of champions that are going to gain and lose a lot. I'll do my best to guess. Not sure I'm going to be right. So 8.23 is time for preseason. We're going to really quickly go through champion changes. They don't mean a whole ton, but let's talk about them really briefly. Aatrox's overall ult duration is down, so you don't have to wait as long to kill him. However, his actual health generation is up from seconds 8 through 10. He's going to be healing more than before, but seconds 10 through 12, he'll just die. Overall, that is definitely a nerf. Aatrox is a weaker champion. Next up, buffs for AP Ezreal. The level 1 and especially the level 5 rank ups of W are much, much higher. The AP ratio going up as well. Buffs for AP Ezreal, that seems fine, good for them. Also a cool change to True Shot Barrage where it is simply going to do half damage to minions and non-epic monsters, which is in most cases a nerf. You used to be able to like one-shot the caster minions for the first 4 or 5 hits. That's going to mostly go away. But you always do full damage to champions, and that's a pretty cool thing. So that's actually a buff to AD Ezreal. So Ezreal definitely a stronger champion. That seems fine. Next up, Lissandra gets a new passive. First, she gets a bit more attack speed. She gets a bit more mana regen. She gets a bit better auto attacks. But her passive is now basically summoning enemy Kog'Maw ultimates off of every champion that you get a killer assist on. That is definitely a pretty big deal. They run around, they do pretty decent magic damage, they have an ability power ratio, they slow if they're nearby to you, pretty big stuff. Now in addition to the mana regen buffs she got up here, which doesn't ultimately mean all that much overall, trust me, it's not that big of a deal. Slight mana cost buff to the Q, slight mana cost buff to the W, and then alongside that are damage nerfs to W, damage nerfs to R, and a usability buff. Generally, the Claw will be farther in almost all cases, almost literally all cases, aside from max range. So she can blink farther away, cost less mana, does a little bit less damage, but now has a passive that deals damage in team fights. Ultimately, it makes her a bit less of an assassin because her burst damage is down, but makes her more of a control mage. I think this is probably overall power positive, but we'll see what happens. Next up, nerfs. Arguably nerfs to Taliyah. Big cooldown hit, but the big nerf is everything takes a lot less damage. So if you're going to hit 5 stones before to, let's say, blue buff, it would do 5x damage. Now if you hit all 5 stones on blue buff, it does 3x damage because it does half on the subsequent stones. What that means, though, with the cooldown going down is it is still a DPS nerf in most cases. Less of a nerf at rank 1, or more of a nerf at rank 5 once the cooldown becomes the same number. What it does, though, in particular, in addition to all this, is if you are happening to stand on worked ground, you simply enjoy the cooldown buff. Mana cost was 1 no matter what on worked ground, that doesn't matter. But you enjoy the cooldown buff if you're on worked ground. So if you're out of spots to throw 5 stones from, the ability is objectively more powerful in ranks 1 through 4. That is a bit atypical, but let's move on to the next piece, which is now worked ground goes away every 2 minion waves. Now, this did not matter in the jungle because camps respawned every 2.5 minutes. Worked ground lasts 2 minutes, ergo, you never had to worry about that when clearing a camp a second time. I'm sure there were situations where you wanted to use the same ground a second time and you couldn't quite, but by and large, it doesn't really matter. What does change, though, is the fact that now if you're playing lane Taliyah, now certainly you do less damage to minions than you did before, to the tune of about 40%. That's not trivial, but your work ground is refreshed and gone and ready to reuse about twice as often. And so, again, DPS is overall down despite all these changes. Anyway, what it comes down to it is Taliyah is going to be a slower jungle slower jungler in almost all cases. There are probably going to be certain breakpoints where getting a second Q off actually makes the difference when a more powerful first Q just didn't cut it. Those are going to exist in some cases, but by and large, Talia is nerfed in the jungle. As far as laning is concerned, arguably nerfed, but this definitely matters quite a bit. Small bug fix to Yorick. His stuff now draws aggro better. Okay, cool. Let's move on. Doran's shield getting a reshape. I would argue this is a nerf in almost all usable cases. The regen is different, essentially. It is different. What it ultimately comes down to is as long as you are, instead of regenning 20, you regen 30 when you're at 1/4 HP, which means if you are 2/3 the way between nowhere and 1/4 HP, you then regen the same. Now that equilibrium point is at half health. So if you are above half health, Doran's shield is worse. If you are below half health, Doran's shield is better. If you're sitting at half health, you are fairly likely to die. So generally speaking, this is in most usable cases a nerf to the item. So regen is down. Champions are more bullyable and more killable, because if you're at half, you can probably be killed off. Now that said, some champions do try to lick their wounds at 1/3 and find ways to heal back up, and in those cases, if they're actually staying at 1/3 and not dying to all-ins, then they are getting more regen and not getting poked out of lane. So you do have to pull the trigger as the aggressor, but if you're getting them below half constantly, you're probably doing good work in the first place. You're probably fine. You're probably winning that lane anyway. So, it basically makes champions sit in the zone of they can be dived more frequently. Next up, changes to Ginsu's Rage Blade. So first of all, it is cheaper. However, the on-hit damage is always going to be lower. Keep in mind that the item gave you 25 attack damage and 25 ability power. So just by nature, it gave you 15 on-hit damage, but now it no longer scales. It no longer scales off anything else. It is always 15 on-hit damage. So that is weaker. Of course, the item is cheaper. Now, instead of granting you attack damage and ability power per stack right here, it grants between 6.5 and 15% total armor and magic pen. And based on what I'm reading here, that doesn't require you to stack it all the way up, though maybe it does and I'm misreading this, or they miswrote the patch notes. It just simply gives you percent pen. Now that can go up and down, of course, because as you are building stacks, if you have none, well, you still enjoy the percent pen, but if you get all the way to max stacks, it's going to generally be a nerf. The way this math works out is this much percent armor and magic pen is anywhere between a 3 and 12% damage boost based on what level you are and the armor and magic resist of your opponents. If you're level 18 and you're still fighting squishies, you're looking at like a 6% damage bump in like super late game scenarios. But if you're level 18 and you're facing, a full build Maokai, you're looking at something closer to 12% total damage, which is quite a bit. That's quite a decent more multiplier. And arguably better than what this would have given you, because you'll generally still take the base damage on Kog'Maw W, the base damage on Blade of the Ruin King, the base, value of stacking Rend over the percent AD AP buff. In general, this is slightly stronger in many late game scenarios, but certainly quite a bit weaker in the early game scenarios because there's not a lot of damage to multiply, and getting percentage of your early attack damage in AP was going to be worth more. So I agree, it does what it says here. With the cost nerf, buff, I guess, the cost going down, it's hard to say for sure if this item is overall weaker or stronger. I'm leaning towards stronger, but that might be crazy. If I'm misreading this, or they miswrote it, and it really does require full stacks to get this pen, it is definitely weaker. But if it doesn't require this, it's probably an overall stronger item. Next up, they are, as we'll see with changes later on, you are no longer getting hit with a Monster Hunter penalty, where if you have the highest CS with a jungle item, you don't get penalized. That's really good. The design team always said they were trying to find a more elegant solution to Gold Funnel. They didn't like this, but it was a necessary evil. I still agree with that sentiment. I think the player base at this point does as well. But they think they found a more elegant solution with the Gold Funneling changes, and we'll see if that's true. Next up, Relic Shield update. It's gonna at tier 2 and 3. Last hit at higher values of health by a pretty substantial margin, about 50%. Now, still slots in your total attack damage, so the true buff is not 50%, but it's still a pretty big buff. Don't worry about it. You're going to last hit things more easily. Overall, cool. This keeps up with minion health buffs, which we're going to get to a little bit later on in the patch. Next up, they are capping the number of control words in inventory from 3 to 2. That almost only affects pro. And generally speaking, the goal seems to be to punish teams that are winning a bit more. And we're seeing this right here, that they're saying the division game favors the team that's ahead. I think that's generally true. If you're seeing something like this where the ward duration goes down, but the average level scaling of all champions is now taking the cooldown and stuff into account as opposed to the level of the owner, which again helps supports, helps bot laners, and is helping the team that is behind have better trinkets. I think this is just a good change. I think this is a good change. I just think it's positive for the game overall. Supports can feel better. The losing team can feel better. I think that's fine. I think that's completely fair to do. This is honestly a fairly small change. I don't think it means all that much, to be honest. It's kind of whatever, in my opinion. Yeah, it affects pro slightly. Yeah, they can choke out vision a bit less well, which means that winning teams can't take Baron quite as easily, which means we might see Baron attempts less frequently. That said, though 3-stack control words definitely does happen, it is not the norm. You're often seeing 1 or only 2 on the backs, so I think this change looks bigger on paper than it is in actuality, and it means almost nothing for solo queue. And for the supports who are saying, hey, but now I can't control vision as well, that you're getting less control wards, you are getting your trinkets on cooldown more frequently, you're getting your sweeper up more often, and arguably can delete vision just as well as after the patch. So ultimately, these things I think somewhat wash out, but certainly do help the losing team, help claw their vision back. What's interesting though is the ward duration is down fairly substantially. Now, the nerf looks bigger on paper than it is in real life. You're like, wow, instead of scaling by 90, it scales by 30. What a big nerf. But in actuality, it's just not that big because you're not dropping level 18 wards for almost the entirety of the game due to this change here. The support's going to keep you down for a while. It still is a nerf, don't get me wrong. This still matters to a certain degree, don't get me wrong. The map will probably overall be darker. You're going to have less totems out. You're going to have less control wards out for the winning team, which usually what they do is delete warding totems, so it's not that big of a deal. And again, it's not going to be much for solo queue. Overall, again, total vision is down. I don't feel like total vision needed to go down, but they're trying to lower the snowballiness of the winning team, which maybe that happens. We'll see. This still felt superfluous to me, but we'll see what happens. All right, now we are on to the biggest changes of the game. Turrets are scaling differently, and this is a really, really, really big deal. Okay, so now turret plating exists. The outer turrets now have 5 chunks to their health bar, and every 1,000 health you remove from the turret is going to give you a bunch of gold. Right here, dealing 1,000 damage gives you 160 local gold. However, as you delete these chunks off the turret, the armor and MR go up by 30. And they're going to stay up by 30 per chunk deleted up till 14 minutes into the game, whereupon the armor MR goes back down to 0. Now that is instead of all the armor and MR scaling they used to have. The health is up quite a bit, which I'm not finding here right away. Here we go. That was a big overview, so let's actually go down to this. So outer turret's health is up, but the armor and MR is lower for a large portion of the game, going back up with other things. Now I actually managed to incorrectly, I just realized, organize my math here. So let's drop down to the actual outer turret stuff, which is right here. So outer turret durability. And so what I'm choosing to say right here is as time goes on, and we're saying 25 minutes is a decent time to stop thinking about outer turrets, which I think is reasonable. Said, okay, how much effective hit points were on the old turret and how much effective HP is on the new turret? And as we can see here, as we crest into the mid game, if you are able to scale up this turret, it goes up to, 6,000, 6,460 health, right? So an outer turret costs you up to 6,460 damage to knock it down all the way. Now it takes you 10,000 total damage to knock the turret down all the way, unless we get to 14 minutes and the plating falls off and you're doing full damage to it, in which case there's only 5,000 damage that needs to be dealt to knock that turret down from 14 minutes onwards. What that means is for the first 13 minutes and 59 seconds, the turret is somewhere between 60 and 57% more durable. The turret takes quite a lot longer to kill, about 60% longer to kill. But If you get screwed and you can't win your laning phase, and you never touch the enemy turret until 14 minutes into the game, it is instead about 23% more fragile, and thus easier to kill. So, long stalemates where you finally get map control back, the turrets are going to fall. But if you're winning your lane, these turrets are more and more durable. What I'm choosing to do right here at the very top of this chart is how durable is section 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Each 20% of the health bar, how much more is there? The first 20% of the health bar is only 18% higher. The second 20%, 42, 67, 90, and that final 20% is twice as durable as before. At minutes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I just picked the numbers to compare it to. Didn't have to be this, but this is what it is. So ultimately, the turret is more durable for the laning phase, and then squishier afterwards. Now, one thing that is also happening, though, if I'm remembering this properly, unless it got removed, but I don't think it did, is turret plating here. For 20 seconds after a plate is destroyed, it also gains Bulwark, granting an additional 25 armor and MR for each nearby enemy champion past the first. So if you are trying to rush down a turret with your entire team, or 3 or 4 of the team, let's say Kindred gang spot lane, you choose to try to force the turret down, it is even harder to kill, even harder to knock down than before, and you are much less likely to succeed. So what this means is you've got a choice to make. If you get a gank off, or if you force your opponents to recall, are you choosing to knock down a plate then back and deal 1,000-something damage, trigger your spell Thief's Gold, try to get 160 gold off that plate, and then get your recall? Or do you say, nope, let's recall on time, let's go right away? And if the minions knock down that plate without you there, you lose out on the 160 gold. And the turret, of course, does not die nearly as fast. And so you've got choices to make. Is it worth staying in lane and knocking down plating, or do you just take the recall, deny that wave of farm, hope you don't miss the plating yourself, which of course you could potentially miss, and go on from there? And I don't know that answer, and you're not going to know it either, and it's going to require some experimentation and play to know when is it worth staying in lane. Because if you push them out of lane, if you shove the wave, if you don't recall right away, you're not going to get a good recall, and they're going to shove you back, and you're going to lose minions. And so this timing gets kind of tight. You've got to choose to pretty much stay in lane if you want to cash in on Bulwark. And you're going to have to figure that one out for yourself, because who freaking knows? Worth pointing out, though, that these turrets are going to be dealing more damage overall. They are more threatening. They are better at protecting their team during a turret dive. Now, it's not a big chunk of extra damage in the early game. 15% is not trivial, but it's not gigantic. But it's up to 50% more damage as we get later and later into the game, scaling up at about 14 minutes. This is a very meaningful damage upgrade. Now, turrets have completely fixed damage to minions. This does not affect a minion last hitting at all, but they are certainly better at protecting you on a tower dive. Worth noting. That's going to be a fairly big deal. Now, maybe you do want to defend yourself under the turret because you can stop the dives. And we're going to see what happens. People are going to be tower diving less because the turrets hurt more. And they're going to be arguably less rewarded for pushing you off the turret because they're not going to kill that turret. They can try to cash in gold, but by doing so, are going to take a bad recall, or simply not take a recall and be at a momentary item disadvantage. Unless they can win by so much, they can take the item disadvantage and push you off lane again and then take a good recall. That's hard to say. I don't think it's that likely. Now, inner turrets and inhibitor turrets and nexus turrets are not getting their durability changed. They're simply getting their damage upgraded. So inner and inhibitor turrets are having this damage sort of function right here, up to a nice 40-something% damage upgrade. Worth noting that instead of scaling to 250 at 28 minutes, it scales to 305 at 18. So it spikes really quickly around here, and then starts to trail off, but still ends at 22% more damage. So again, the inhibitor and the tier 2 turrets are going to defend you from dives more better. That's English, but they're worth less total gold. And they're worth less total gold. And the Nexus turrets scaling up similarly, but are worth less total gold. So most of this gold income is coming in from knocking down the bulwark plating, but as your team knocks down tier 2 and tier 3, they're getting less for it. The winning team is getting less snowball. The laning phase might snowball harder if you're getting bulwark gold, but the overall team is getting less gold from just the team winning. There's just less grants of money just because you're knocking down more of their base. And their base can defend themselves more. Nexus turrets, if you're doing these sort of 20-minute end game dives or whatever, are doing 40% more damage. You can maybe defend yourself at your turrets a little bit more. If the game is snowballing, dives are more damaging. They are more scary. You can be defended a little bit better, and maybe you can make that happen. So maybe you can defend yourself. Next up, we have very large changes to minions. As we go way back up to the top and pretend we ordered it properly, we've got a lot of changes here. Okay, so because minions are getting a lot more damage overall, they're going to be slightly less threatening to turrets and slightly less threatening to champions. But when you account for the damage upgrades that they're getting this patch, they are still overall doing more damage to turrets and champions. Worth pointing out that what minions are gaining, though, is a very substantial buff to their movement speed. And I have this chart right here. For the first 9 minutes, it's going to be the same. But at 10 minutes and onwards, minions are going to be moving faster. Now, I want to point out that champions in general get to about close to 400 move speed by getting Boots 2. If you're Nautilus with Boots 2, you're at, I believe, 370. So these things move as fast as Merc treads Nautilus at the 15 to 20 minute mark, and then start to get faster and faster. They're starting to move as fast as Master Yi, and then Master Yi with a Zeal. They're going to get real quick. If you knock down a turret with your minions, they're going to get to that next wave, and they're going to get there fast. They're going to get to that next turret quickly. They're going to be zipping around the map quite a bit. And I don't know what that's going to quite feel like in-game, but it is a pretty meaningful move speed difference, where if you are able to collect a wave, it is going to get there. This is almost certainly going to impact, and it's going to influence where minion waves meet. And I think a lot of us, at a certain point, have kind of learned where the meet points are. Right? They obviously meet in the middle of the mid lane, in the middle of top lane, and then if you have completely crushed the minion wave and yours are free running over, they used to meet right in front of the tier 2 and roughly in turret range. It was close to turret range, right about that outer ring. But now if your waves are moving a lot faster and the wave that would meet it is spawning later, that wave is probably going to crash. That wave is probably going to meet at their actual tier 2 turret. And for the inhibitor one, probably the same, where it's going to meet underneath that turret, and the minions are probably going to aggro. So this means, I'm going to guess that in the mid game, if you one-shot the river wave, if you one-shot the wave that just meets at equilibrium, and no one reacts, it's just going to reach the turret and deal damage, and then immediately push back to you. This could be a very, very big deal, and it could mean a lot for solo queue, because if you are able to run down a bot lane, full clear the wave of Sivir, and run back to mid, they're going to immediately lose that gold instead of it stacking up. And that is quite the difference. So this could have very large changes to mid-game minion control. So let's go into the actual stat changes now of these minions. And what's interesting is the League of Legends wiki, that's just updated by volunteers, was incorrect for some of these numbers. I went and tried to look that up for research. I looked this stuff up for research, tried to figure out as much as I could about the numbers. They don't always line up accurately. I did the best I could to make these numbers go as close as they could, including going into a practice tool game and fast forwarding and snapshotting minion health every few minutes and trying to get my values pretty close. So my data table is going to be pretty close to what it was, but it's not perfect. I'll be off by maybe 5% at some points. So let's go into it. Minions are going to have more health, they're going to have more damage, and they're going to have less damage reduction from stuff with Baron buff on. Also, they have armor, so that melee minions are harder to kill for physical damage champions, such as, well, Sivir. Okay, so here is melee minion HP. All right, game time, which means how many times they've upgraded, and which wave number in the game this is. All you really care about is game time here, as you look at the very first wave of the game to super end game. 37 minutes is longer than most games take. I know it can go farther, but that's when the scaling stops for the most part. And minions used to go like this, and now they go like this. And here's how much more durable they actually are, roughly. Melee minions very quickly get to about 15 to 20% to eventually 30% in pretty late game scenarios because of this. A pretty meaningful durability upgrade. And this is how much damage they take to kill against minions and against champions. And I want to point out that because a lot of minions got a big DPS bump, because these things have armor, it protects them against minion DPS. They're going to tank up against minions a bit better because, in general, minion damage went up faster than minion health. So this is going to try to equalize that a little bit. Also worth pointing out that, of course, yes, it also makes them more durable against champion wave clear. Wave clear is going to be slower. Again, turret damage versus minions is capped. It's guaranteed to be a certain amount. So this does not affect turret last hitting. It'll affect your ability to last hit because when the minions have more health and have more armor, it'll be harder for you to do the last 30% or whatever, or the last 10% of their health. So that will make it more difficult, but the turret itself isn't getting much of a breakpoint. What it did change was how much damage they take with Baron buff on, right? So we already talked about the fact that it is harder for champions to wave clear them out of the box. Okay. With Baron buff on, there is no difference. In fact, it is weaker. Turrets clear minions faster with Baron on than before because they are no longer getting the Baron turret damage reduction. So those get cleared unless you're doing something with the minions. It is essentially nerfing the impact of Baron. And in fact, if you are Baron buffing up your melee minions and you're keeping their stats into account, Baron buff barely makes these minions tankier against champions. Again, this is not counting the fact that they gain 16 armor. They are definitely substantially tankier against physical damage champions, against Sivir, against Lucian, against these types of champions. In fact, you could probably undo the Lucian ult nerf from a few months ago, and it would be fine, but that's somewhere else on this debate. They are only slightly more durable against champions with Baron buff on. It exists, it's still there, but considering that they are less durable against turrets than before, this is probably close to a wash. So minions are no longer, at least melee minions, are no longer much tankier with Baron, but they are much tankier without Baron. How about melee minion DPS? Substantially up. Melee minion DPS eventually hextuples. It goes up by a lot. It goes up by a lot. Now, again, keep in mind they are facing other melee minions who are a bit more durable and have armor on top of this one, so this 27% is more like 50%, all things considered. But these things are doing a ton of damage. Now, keep in mind, they used to do 15 DPS, now they scale from 15 to 100 DPS. We're going to get a caster minion DPS in a little bit, but remember that instead of staying at 15, for 3 of them, and they would die first in the wave, keep in mind, so caster minions did more damage overall. It scales from 15 to 100 DPS per minion. Now, this is still very meaningful damage. Their DPS percent is up by a lot, of course. Even though they took a slight hit in their amount of damage they dealt to turrets and champions, it is still up by a lot. It's triple in the mid-game. Keep in mind that once turret plating falls at 14 minutes, they're doing 2.5x, and very quickly going to 3x, and higher and higher and higher. One thing worth pointing out that has not been seen yet in the patch notes, but is farther down, is super minions are no longer buffing minion DPS. So because supers are no longer buffing minion DPS, this is now what their DPS looks like, with a super minion that no longer buffs them around. And it is still higher. So the reliance on Baron and the reliance on super minions is going down because they are stronger on their own. And then the comparative value of Baron and the comparative value of super minions has gone down as well, not only because you can end the game without them, but also in their raw impact that is lower as well, which means that if you can withstand the super minion coming into your base because they killed your inhibitor, I mean, that push is just not quite as punishing. It is still more punishing in absolute raw power. The DPS is still up, and it still may very well be enough to just end the game with the inhib down. That's potentially quite likely. But just FYI, this is the kind of difference you're seeing. All right, next up, caster minions. A very similar thing. Health scaling up, just not quite as aggressively. Max AD scaling quite a bit more aggressively. And again, we talked about the fact that melee minions scaled from 15 to 100 DPS. Caster minion will go for their damage first, scaled from 15 to 40 DPS, now scales from 15 to 80 DPS at 37 minions. So now, interesting to note, melee minions are now the damage winners. It used to be that caster minions were the only ones that scaled damage. Cannons as well, but let's just kind of keep this in line for a second. It used to be that caster minions were the high damage minions. Now melee minions are going to out DPS caster minions. That is a substantial change in how to care about minions. But keep in mind that melee minions gained a lot of extra durability, and this is not counting their 16 armor, by the way. Caster minions gained relatively little. Now, the wiki had caster minion health as linear scaling. That was not true. In fact, we're not really quite given the full table of numbers, but it's very close to what I have here. What I've put into this chart is very close to what I got with spot checking and comparing a bunch of math and whatnot. This is pretty close to accurate, if it's not quite perfect. But as it says, it simply scales for longer. And so same health in the early game, but from minutes 28 to 38, it's slightly higher. Slightly more durable. Either way, caster minions were the ones you typically killed right away and wave cleared with a Sivir Q or a Victor E or something else. And they are still going to be profoundly squishy. Profoundly squishy. But they are now not only squishier, but also providing less total DPS than the melee minions. So once again, let's look at how much damage they take from champions. Because before we looked at melee minions, and melee minions, again, with Baron on, well, so again, overall quite a bit more durable. With Baron on, less durable against turrets, and with Baron on, only slightly more durable against champions. But now caster minions are getting different math. They are similarly less buffed by Baron against turrets, but they are, by comparison, more buffed against champions. Baron buffed caster minions now have substantially more durability. They are much harder to wave clear. So melee minions are slightly harder to wave clear than before with Baron on. Caster minions are a lot harder to wave clear with Baron on than before. So now the entire wave is going to be better at pushing forward and withstanding Sivir and Ezreal and Jhin and Victor and etc. wave clear. And they're likely to get their hits on against the turret. Caster minion DPS is up, and it's up a lot against, well, not quite as much, but still up a lot against turrets and champions. So the minions are going to be doing more work. And keep in mind, Tier 2, Tier 3, and Tier 4 turrets did not gain more durability. It was only the outer turrets for the first 14 minutes. And because the way these minions are gaining damage, it is scaling up throughout time. It is scaling up over and over the first few minutes. They're overall providing less damage at turret killing. It is still going to require more from you to knock them down. The one final thing to bring up is if you got a 50-minute inhibitor, technically caster minions are doing slightly less DPS with super minions around them because, again, that aura is gone. But again, in most cases, in raw, absolute, just pure on-the-page value, a super wave is still doing more damage than before. Overall, more damage than before. With an asterisk that we'll get to in a little bit. Next up, cannon minions. Still scales infinitely, but simply scales harder. 2900 at 37 minutes. Max AD, unchanged, still scales infinitely, and is still 77 at 37 minutes. But their spawn rates are moved up. You're getting them every other wave at 15, and you're getting them every single wave at 25. This is really pushing you towards ending games, towards pushing towards this 30-minute victory, which, I mean, I think that is what's going to be happening, that the laning phase will last about 5 minutes longer, but the game will end 15 minutes after laning phase ends. You're going to have about almost equal time in laning phase as you are in the mid to late game sieging phase, which we'll see what it looks like. So cannon minions get more health, and they also take a lot less damage from turrets. Instead of dying, I believe this was, this took 8 shots. It's 8, 10, and 13 shots for a turret to solo kill a cannon minion. That's a pretty big deal for Tier 2s, Tier 3s, and Tier 4s to not kill your minions as fast. That's going to, again, if you're able to shove them in and let minions do work, they're going to take care of these turrets for you. Because, again, only the outer turrets are more durable. Otherwise, minions are going to start chomping down on the other turrets and clearing them more quickly. And keep in mind that although these turrets got more damage, their damage against minions is capped to % max health. So those anti-dive buffs do not make them clear minions faster. Minions are going to destroy meaningful turrets meaningfully faster. But let's do this math. Let's look at how much more durable exactly cannon minions are. Here is Cannon Minion HP as best I could estimate it. I could be slightly wrong in some of these numbers. It might not scale exactly linearly, but I did not know exactly what numbers to use, so I kind of guessed. I said that it scaled up by, I think it was 83 always, and I hoped I was right. Because this scaled by 50, and then later on scales by 60 from 50 minutes onward. It's the best I can give you. I hope that scaled linearly. Overall, though, these minions are more durable, they gain more health, and they are harder to wave clear by champions because they're harder to wave clear. They have more health. They are harder to remove. It makes Minion Dematerializer slightly better, I guess, because it's doing more total damage. Same for hitting melee minions with it, by the way. It does more total damage, so it's a buff to that rune. But with Baron on, Baron buff is no longer giving it the same level of turret durability that it had before. But I didn't really include the fact that a Baroned up cannon minion is probably tanking a tier 2 or tier 3 turret. Also, Baroned up cannon minions very rarely take turret aggro. It would require a Syndra to move it or a Baron buff to come in after it's already in range. This mostly doesn't matter. This almost never comes into play, so you can mostly ignore this part. What does matter, though, is that because you are not giving these minions the same level of damage reduction from Baron buff you were before, they're actually easier to wave clear. Specifically, Baroned up cannon minions are easier to wave clear than before based on, unless I'm getting numbers wrong, easier to wave clear. Now, everything else is certainly harder to wave clear. So it's, generally speaking, still going to be more powerful, but worth noting that, again, the value of Baron is comparatively slightly lower. It is doing less work for you than before. Also want to point out that Baron buff gives flat bonus damage to ranged minions, which in comparative value is going to be less important. It's going to be less valuable than before. It's a flat 20 damage, which, going from... now, this is a DPS thing as opposed to damage per attack, but it's certainly going to be comparatively less valuable. In absolute value, still going to be higher, because of course it is, but in comparative value, it is going down. So that's Cannon Minion HP. And again, they're tankier at tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 minions. Now, next up, super minions. Same durability, still quite high. Base attack damage is down, but base attack speed goes up. Still scales infinitely, scales to different numbers. What does this mean exactly for DPS? Well, here you go. I again assume you're going to spawn inhibitor at maybe 15 minutes at earliest, so we're going to use those numbers as our examples. But here is super minion DPS before and after, and it is very, very close to the same. Worth pointing out, though, that because all minions only do, all minions do less damage to turrets and champions now, they do 40% instead of 50%, the actual damage to major objectives is down. But keep in mind that all those other minions are doing more. So even though super minions are doing less DPS slightly, the other minions are doing more DPS, even after accounting for the fact that the super minion aura is gone. Still increases resists, and those things are still much tankier. These things are still going to be super, super durable, but hey, super minion is less important at winning you the game. The minions do that work for you without the inhib being down. It already happens. So this means that now maybe you're going to have more games end quickly off of one good push because you've got more buffed up minions and they can do more work for you. That might be true. And again, the absolute value of a super wave or a Baron wave is still higher. It's still doing more work. You may just end games off these kinds of pushes. But you're doing them slightly earlier into the game. Those turrets are more lethal to the opposing champions. And if you are doing it earlier into the game, the respawn timers are shorter, and thus reinforcements come by a bit more quickly. But we'll see. I think in general, this still overall lowers game time. I think you end games more quickly. And it's going to be a shock to people. They're going to be like, holy crap, my turrets are melting. I think people are going to be surprised by how lethal turrets are against you in a dive. And they're going to be surprised by how quickly you're going to kill off these turrets with your minion waves. And it's going to be interesting to look at and see how that goes. Other pacing things. Elemental Drakes are going to start spawning at 5 minutes, not 2.5. But they're going to respawn 1 minute faster. So if you're kind of camping the Drakes, they're going to be roughly the same number of Drakes killed, roughly. But Elder's down to a 6-minute spawn, and Baron's on a 6-minute spawn. I actually love that these spawn at the same frequency. I think it's a very good change that they spawn every 6 minutes, right? I mean, overall pacing is clearly up with preseason. 5 minutes for a Drake, 6 minutes for Elder, 6 minutes for Baron. So now second Baron is going to be going down at 26:30 instead of 27:30. That can matter if you don't end the game on the first Baron push. Second Elder Dragon is going to come in 2 minutes sooner. That's a big deal. And in fact, the latest possible first Elder is also getting pushed up a minute because that Drake's not going to spawn so late anymore, right? It's not going to spawn at 36, it'll spawn at 35 or etc. You know what I'm kind of talking about. That's definitely meaningful. But there's more. There's more. So let's first talk about, before we talk about this part, let's talk about this. The first Elemental Drake buff is going to be worth more than before. Now, the rank 3 is going to stay the same. It's going to stay the same. It's going to stay the same. It's going to stay the same. But in the case of sort of underappreciated Drakes, underappreciated early Drakes, Ocean Drake is 50% stronger at rank 1. Cloud is 50% stronger at rank 1. And Mountain Drake is 60% stronger at rank 1. These Drakes are all substantially more valuable. It's Drake 1.5 instead of 1. Getting one of these is a pretty big deal. Now, Infernal Drake doesn't need that help. It's Drake 1.25 because Infernal was already the most sought after. And at a certain point, if you said, okay, well, 8% attack damage is better than 2% move speed, okay, that might be true. But is 10% attack damage better than 3% move speed? This is now a bit harder of a comparison. You may still think Infernal is better, but that bridge has absolutely, or that gap has absolutely been bridged. That is unquestionable. Now, the one thing I was concerned about was them buffing Ocean Drake, because early Ocean Drakes were already exceptional. They would already almost automatically win you the laning phase. I remember there was a game at Worlds where an Olaf flashed over the wall because a blast cone wasn't there to solo an Ocean Drake at 3 minutes or 4 minutes or something. They burned Flash to solo an Ocean Drake, and it was worth it. It's a really big deal, but because this Drake isn't spawning until 5 minutes, and by that point, you're going to have a bit more maybe time for your players to roam around and leave their spots on the map. And keep in mind that solo lanes hit level 6 just before 6 minutes, so they're close to having ults for this. You are likely to have some ults for your first Drake fight. And it's certainly not going to be soloed at level 3 or 4. This is certainly a nerf to champions like, I think, Shaco and Nunu and I think like Heimerdinger and ones that could solo Drake really early on. Fiddle could do this, I'm pretty sure. Certainly that power goes away. That power gets dropped, and maybe that matters a lot. We'll see. But I do kind of like that you don't just have a laning phase Drake happen, where suddenly I'm playing level 3 and I'm trying to play a lane bully in Lucian, and they're Olaf soloed Ocean. Guess your laning phase doesn't matter anymore. I think that's kind of good. I'm glad this is getting pushed back. I'm still worried about 6% missing health and mana regen per 5 seconds out of combat. That seems like a pretty big deal. But hey, is what it is. Either way, I like these changes. It again helps rebalance how willing you are to fight for a Drake that is not Infernal, because Infernal is getting the least of all the buffs. It also means that if your opponent had 2 Infernals and you had 1, instead of it being 16-8, it's 17-10, which is just ever so slightly, less big. It's 7% off instead of 8% off. It's not a huge deal, don't get me wrong. Infernal barely moved, but it's certainly like comparing 2 clouds to 1 is only 1.5% move speed. So hey, big differences there. When you're going for your third, if they steal 1, it actually really cuts your knees out, and it makes those differences pretty close. Which, hey, interesting. Yeah, hey, there you go. Whatever. Also, it means that if you're getting an Elder Dragon on like only 1 Cloud Drake, it's giving you more, right? It's turning 1 Cloud Drake into 2 Cloud Drakes. And it's turning 1 ocean into 2 oceans. And it's turning 1 mountain into 2 mountains instead of it turning into 1.5. So like there's even other little fiddly bits that are slightly stronger. Ultimately, I'm kind of waxing on a bit too long about this. Now, what I will say is there is a big, I don't think it's that big. I think it's actually personally a fairly small change. They are slightly nerfing late game jungle camp XP. And keep in mind, this does not affect your first clear basically at all. It affects your second and third clear a little bit. You're not getting max camp XP value until your 5th or 6th clear. Like, I want to point that out, that the average champion level does not hit level 7 until your 5th or 6th clear. Your third clear is around the time solos are like hitting level 6 and the bot lane is still level 5 or 4. You are not getting this by your third clear. You are not getting this by your 4th clear, which is you are getting this later and later into the game. So these nerfs, you're like, this is 18 less XP on just one monster. It is not that big. It matters. It exists. Don't get me wrong. It exists, but it is not that big. What it is, though, is it's somewhat compensation, because the camps are slightly down in value. Don't get me wrong. They are down in value, but the dragon is worth more gold and more XP. So choosing to sacrifice Gromp and instead spend the time to take Drake, you will be less behind. In fact, you're getting essentially Gromp gold or blue buff gold or Wolves gold for knocking down the Drake. So you're actually keeping up in gold income if you can do this. It also means that you are gaining fairly close to the XP you were missing by taking this Drake here. That you're getting fairly close to what a camp was worth, but you're also making up some of that XP you would have been missing from the prior nerfs. It basically slightly puts Drake into your camp rotation now. I think that's kind of cool. Overall, I don't think these are really large changes. I think junglers may feel them a little bit, but there are more Drakes to... I don't know. Ultimately, I really feel that you can make up for this by having Drake control. I think you get really close there. And again, it raises the value of the first Drake, and it lowers the opportunity cost of taking this Drake because you're getting much more gold relative to what you were getting because you're not sacrificing a camp, if that all makes sense. Okay, let us move on to the last little bit, which I think is fairly small but interesting, is that runes are being updated. You are no longer getting attack speed or adaptive force or health via your tree choice. That is now its own decision within your rune page. You no longer get the bonus stats based on the rune path. You're picking them for yourself. You are picking on row 1, adaptive force or attack speed or CDR. And I want to point out that 10... well, actually, I'll talk about it later, right? So you're getting 10 adaptive force or 9 attack speed or some CDR, or another 10 adaptive force, or some armor MR, or some health and some armor MR. I want to point out that if you were going precision sorcery, or precision domination, or sorcery domination, that was going to give you 9% attack speed and 10 adaptive force, or 20 adaptive force. If you were going double offense, you got row 1 and 2. That was what you got by going double offense. But you now also get another choice. You now also get to go row 3 and pick up health or armor or MR. You can also, of course, choose to ignore one of these bonuses and instead take armor MR. Don't get me wrong, but you just objectively, if you are Lucian, if you're just playing Lucian, or you're playing Fizz, or you're playing almost anyone, you are simply getting more stats. You are getting row 3 resolve for free. Just on top of whatever your champion used to do before, you're now also getting this. Of course, again, you can choose to sacrifice damage and get even more durability, which you may just do, but that's what's happening. Now, if you're playing a tank, if you're playing Maokai and you wanted to go like resolve inspiration, well, that gave you like 30 to 270 health, which is a lot. And if you were going offense resolve, like you were doing, I don't know, precision resolve, that was 15 to 135 health. You are actually getting less HP than before. But you have the option, of course, taking this 5 armor or 6 magic resist to make up for that, and probably makes up that difference no problem. But if you were a double resolve or resolve inspiration, that kind of thing, you arguably can't quite make up for it. You've instead got to pick something like CDR and be a bit more offensive. So what this means is true tanks are slightly less durable. All those Glacial Augment Scions have less overall health. Fact. But all those sort of Domination Sorcery Fizzes have more health or armor or MR based in their lane matchup, don't get me wrong, that Lucian or that Caitlyn just has more health or armor or MR overall. I don't know how I feel about that. I just think it's worth noting that essentially Resolve got nerfed as a path. Like Resolve in and of itself, I want to point out that if you were going Precision Resolve, you got the primary bonus within Resolve. You actually, if you were someone who did do that, and I thought it was actually quite good. I think Resolve secondary was underrated. Well, now that bribe is gone, so you're just going to have to pick your defensive stats anyway. And I honestly, in retrospect now, I want to point out that, again, I think stats have now been power crept. I talked about this in last year's preseason, that I think Riot did a really good job at very closely balancing the durability before and after. That you got fully compensated your seals, you essentially got fully compensated your quintessences, and a lot of your other sort of rune choices for flat AP. Or attack damage or whatever else. You basically all the rune page shenanigans got consumed, and aside from champions that got given free attack speed marks, everything washed out fairly. Everything washed out very close to fairly, but people again who got attack speed marks, namely tanks, came out equal. Tanks came out ahead. They got free attack speed. Now, all those squishies who got their stats reimbursed are getting extra stats. They're getting extra durability above and beyond what they got before. Tanks who are getting arguably a bit less durability are still getting a very nice, solid offensive rune choice in their 1 to 10% CDR or maybe attack speed. And I'm pretty sure every jungler's going to take this attack speed and feel pretty good about it. All right, so it's cool though because I think this will overall take a different look at things. It will open up more options because now you don't care about what trees you are taking. You are taking them purely for the runes. And now you have more options around this. So if you wanted to go Resolve, if you wanted to get Guardian and Minion Dematerializer, you can still get a bunch of Adaptive Force and some flat armor. Options more open. Should be good. I'm going to like this. Slight nerf to Fleet Footwork for mages. I think that's probably fine. They said they did this because the AP rush was high to try to bribe mages to grab it, but now a mage can simply take Fleet Footwork, Legend Tenacity, Coup de Grace, overheal or whatever, and not worry about attack speed being a useless stat. Or they can simply go, they still could have, but they can easily go Precision Secondary and just take Coup de Grace and Triumph or Presence of Mind. Like Presence of Mind is now a better rune because you're not taking attack speed for free on Kassadin or something. That's useful. So that's kind of nice. Celerity update. Instead of giving 1.5% move speed, increases your move speed bonuses by 8%. Want to point out a generic champion with Boots 2 has about 380-ish move speed, which is roughly 6 move speed from this. Roughly 5 to 6 move speed from this. Boots 2 gives 45, so 8% of 45 is like about 5-ish move speed. So just Boots 2, it's close. And if you have anything above that, you're going to generally have better move speed now as a result of Celerity, but no longer gives you free stats. This is certainly a nerf for most generic purposes. But if, you're playing Trinity Force Boots 2 on Jax or Aurelia or something, you are going to walk around faster. If you're trying to be a roaming champion, if you're, Aurelian Soul or Talia or whatever, you're generally moving around faster. This is a buff with Boots of Mobility, and or if you're using water walking with movement speed upgrades also in your kit. But again, you're losing the bonus damage. And that is super, super relevant. This rune is going to be much, much, much more niche. Absolute Focus is going to be a pretty easy generic rune to pick up in this spot. Transcendence is going to be a pretty easy generic rune to pick up in this spot. I am pretty confident 10% CDR fights Celerity Absolute Focus unless I'm really trolling, but I don't think I am. We'll see though. There might be some really good users here. If like Lucian with W plus not Ultimate Hunter, but with W plus like Nimbus Cloak ends up being a really good combo with Celerity. There you go. You never know. Sometimes that happens. Next up, I think this is a really cool change. I actually really, really like this Dark Harvest update. It's funny because it lines up with the rest of the preseason changes in a really interesting way. What the preseason changes are basically saying is if you are a lane bully, you don't kill their turret, and maybe you don't turret dive them, but you farm off the lane. You farm by hitting their turret and getting bonus gold. You farm Dark Harvest stacks by hurting them. If you deal any damage and they're below half health, you harvest a soul and deal bonus damage. Keep in mind that Doran's shield is nerfed until they're below half health. So if you're going to bully them, you're going to bully them hard. You're going to keep bullying them. You're going to get them down to half, and you're going to start stacking your Dark Harvest against them in lane to make your next all-in even better. Okay, yeah, the cooldown is 45 seconds. Don't get me wrong. That's, somewhat meaningful, but that is a pretty big bump. And it will refresh itself on a 1.5 second cooldown if you're in a team fight, which is pretty reasonable. You're going to get this off multiple times in a team fight. This is pretty cool. You're not going to farm it by clearing the jungle. You're not going to farm it by picking up cannon minions. You're going to farm it by hitting champions. Most jungle ganks that are successful are going to trigger Dark Harvest. Lee Sin is going to deal that much damage if he lands Q. And just getting a gank off and getting down to half, that's fine. That's probably enough. You farmed Dark Harvest. You did bonus burst damage. Now, it's not quite electrocute damage, don't get me wrong. It's not going to be there until you harvest more souls, but you're stacking up. You're going to get empowered against them. You're going to get your gank off, deal some damage, hit their little turret for stuff, and move on. This seems pretty decent. This is cool. I like this a lot. Also, I want to point out one thing that I think is particularly interesting. If you are playing Dark Harvest with Sorcery Secondary, if I'm reading any damage right, this should work for something like Scorch. So if you are ahead on Jace and you land a really big Shock Blast, bam, and they fall down to below half, and then Scorch deals any damage, it should trigger Dark Harvest for you. If you have a lot of damage on the poke champion, you've got Liandry's Torment. I mean, any poke champion with Scorch, obviously, but also Liandry's Torment. Again, deals any damage. If you have a Corrupting Potion, deals any damage. Ignite, deals any damage. Anything that kind of has this trailing dot should trigger Dark Harvest and do more on your all-in. Or even just your poke if you're getting them low. This should be relevant. I definitely want to try this. I think this can be really, really, really valuable. This looks cool. You're sometimes going to take short trades. Like if you're playing, press the attack Lucian, well, this is more damage than press the attack deals by a decent margin, especially because it does scale off your AD and it does scale off Harvested Souls. If you're playing a lane bully in bot lane, the two of you can come together and use Dark Harvest and chunk someone for 100 HP once they're at half, and they only have like 500 health coming in, so that is a lot of their health. I can easily see double Dark Harvest bot lanes being really good, and keep in mind, it doesn't, it doesn't require your stat choices. You can still take attack speed and whatnot on a marksman and everything else, so this seems really, really cool. Maybe the numbers are off. Maybe it's going to end up being weak, but I really like what this does. Small nerf to Ravenous Hunter. It is simply 1% lower. The stacking is still the same, but yep, it is only 60% of the spell vamp until you start stacking. Then it gets very close to the same number. But yeah, this rune has been generically the best. Almost everyone takes it. It's almost always the strongest rune. Good to nerf it. A Demolish Change, which I actually have run the numbers for. So the charge time is 3/4 as long. That is pretty meaningful. The damage is down by 75, but what does that really mean? Well, as we scroll all the way down, because we're done with most of this turret stuff, here is Demolish damage. I chose Pyke as my example champion. It's slightly weird because, Pyke has the highest base health in the game by a lot. But I assumed that if you're running Demolish, you're probably running the bonus HP rune in the bottom of that tree right there. And you're probably running something like a Relic Shield or a Doran Shield or some other way of getting your max HP up. So I figured it was, reasonably close. And your damage is only down about 20%, then eventually down less than 10% by the end game. So really not that big of a hit. Still a hit, don't get me wrong. It's still 75 damage off, but you're going to get these 300, 400 something chunks off of the turrets, which gets you pretty close to any given Palisade being knocked off that turret. Gets you almost halfway there, or about 1/3 of the way there. That's meaningful. That's cool. And again, this becomes a gold generation rune. If you trigger Demolish 3 times, that's 160 gold. Straight up. That earns you a Palisade, and that's 160. Now, okay, split across your team, but it's still 160 total gold. That's still meaningful. That still matters. 160 gold, not bad. In fact, I'll show you some of those numbers before too long. And just the map control, of course, in and of itself, also valuable. And you'll probably trigger Demolish more than 3 times over the course of a game. We're just talking about Palisades in the early game. It's pretty reasonable for Palisades to get it 3 times. Maybe more if you're winning by enough. Who knows? I can totally see, like, Dark Harvest Demolish Zyra, and you're just going to shove them in, and then just smack the turret. That's how you farm a lane. If you're a lane bull, you go Dark Harvest Demolish. You still pick the stats you want that you're going to pick up otherwise. And this is how you bully a lane. You get them to half, you trigger Dark Harvest, you push them off the lane, you trigger Demolish. You can basically farm the laning phase. Maybe that's wishful thinking, but it seems like a viable possibility. A new rune now exists in Shield Bash. While shielded, you get bonus armor MR, so Old Windspeaker's Blessing. And then when you gain a shield, an attack deals this much bonus damage, which is pretty cool. Seems nice. It's really hard for me to math out how good this is going to be, so I'm not going to bother trying. But try it out one day. Bone Plating, blocking 30 more total damage, which is a pretty big bump, as long as you can get it during the buff duration. But it is on row 1, that very top row, alongside Shield Bash, and alongside, I believe, Demolish is up there. I think Demolish is tier 1. I could be wrong. Maybe I'm misremembering. I don't remember anymore. I don't go to Resolve Tree nearly enough. Either way, these are interesting choices, I think. You obviously can't get Bone Plating and Shield Bash together because that is too good of a synergy. Chrysalis is gone. Overgrowth getting a change. Chrysalis was tier 2, I'm pretty sure. All right. So Overgrowth is getting a change. Overgrowth is getting a pretty substantial change. Overgrowth, instead of giving you 0.2% max health per 8 minions, it gives you plus 3 flat health per 8 minions. This breakpoint is 1500 HP. At 1500 HP, 3 health is the same as 0.2% max health. 1500 HP is not reached until mid to late game, so this is an early game buff to the rune. Okay. This 120 minion stack is going to take you roughly 10 minutes because you're going to spawn 6 minions per wave, which is 12 minions per minute. And so at 10 minutes, you get this 2.5%. That's pretty meaningful. That's quite nice. And so I wrote notes down for a lot of this that at this stat count, you would have gotten, if I'm remembering my notes properly, this would have been 3% max health at 120 minions. At that 10 minutes, you would have gotten 3% max health from this. Instead, you're getting 2.5 from this extra bonus and keeping all this flat HP. But overall, the math I want to bring up is that this simply by itself, this 3 health per 8 minions, is worth roughly 4.5 health per minute, which is 135 health in a 30-minute game, plus the 50 bonus HP if your max HP was around 2k, which means that this rune is overall, in a roughly 30-minute game, worth about 185 HP. That is the rough math on this. The rough math on this. So that's what you're looking at there. Overgrowth is 185 health, and the rune bonus you could have picked way up there was, I think, like around 90 or something. So you can get yourself pretty close to 300 bonus HP by picking the health scaling, by picking Overgrowth, scaling yourself up, and being a bit more durable. And you can still take that flat armor MR from other places. So, okay, that seems decent. There's a nice change to Kleptomancy to make it less... I mean, the absolute value is still going to be the same on someone like Ezreal or Gangplank. You're still going to get this still use a spell, get a thing. But now there's a second auto attack available. So if you're playing Riven or Shyvana or, Lucian in a lot of cases, right? E auto, double Klepto right there. That's going to happen. Your next 2 basic attacks will grant things. So Klepto is better on a lot more champions. And I know that's something they were trying to do is not make Klepto so much of a 2 champion wonder right there, where it was really only like, if you can press Q and hit someone with it, you get a Klepto proc. It's like, well, let's branch that a little bit. So there should be more viable users, and that's a cool thing. If you're playing Fizz, you can hit W and you're going to probably auto twice. So that's cool. We'll see who ends up being good Klepto users. I'm going to always love crunching the numbers, looking at all the stats when the patch comes out, which by the time you watch this, it's going to be out in Europe and soon in North America and a lot of other places in the world as well. But this looks pretty cool. I like this change. And now we're cresting past an hour mark, but we are almost done. The last major change, if I recall properly, that's coming into this patch, is changes to bounties. Kill bounties are going to be worth 25 at a 4-kill streak, 50, 100, 150, 200, 250, 300, 350. More gold than before. A 7-kill streak is worth 700 bonus gold, 1,000 for a kill on someone with a 7-kill streak. Godlike shutdown is 1,000 gold. Now you know. It was 550. Well, okay, 850. So, okay, shutdowns are worth a little bit more. That's a comeback mechanic. Yes, indeed. You're also getting some shutdown gold if you are out farming the opposing team. If you have earned 250 more gold from farming than the team was getting on average, not counting their support of their 4 farming rolls, you are earning 50 gold onto your bounty. Now, 250 more gold than the average means they weren't earning 1,000 gold. 1,000 total farm gold went missing, and you got a 50 gold bounty. Now, if you and all 3 of your other farming teammates all accrue this same bounty of 50 gold, there is a 200 total gold bounty on your teammates because they missed 1,000 total gold. This bounty increases by another 200 across the 4 of you when they miss their next 600 total gold. This slightly bridges the gap, but does not come close to equalizing farm differences. It does not come close to that. It shrinks it slightly. It shrinks it somewhere between 1/5 and 1/3 of the way. Not a huge deal, does exist, and does increase bounty value, so that when they go for that risky dive at tier 2 or tier 3, and your turret deals more damage, and you get the shutdown on that Riven, you're getting more gold in your pockets in more cases, and you are more likely to maybe make that comeback happen. It is potentially possible that people are going to be more risk averse and not going for dives because they don't want to give up the bounty gold. But at the same time, shouldn't you be trying to gank that Riven? And that answer is probably yes. So we'll see how that goes. Next thing to note, bounties, when they exist and are pretty big, are now visible. That's pretty cool. Bounties don't increase mid-combat, so if you got a quadra kill and get shut down, you don't get shut down. Overall, you are getting smaller bounty payoffs if your team is losing. So if Riven is 1v9ing, you don't get as much gold from shutting down her because she's trying to 1v9. So that's cool. If you're the solo carry trying to keep your team alive, your first death of the game is not as punishing. That's cool. I think it's a cool change. And single kills are capped at 1,000 gold, which, to be fair, 1,000 gold was much harder to get in the old system. This was a 500 gold bounty, and it would require another 1, 2, 3, 4 more kills. A 10-kill streak was a 1,000 gold bounty. That is now here at a 7-kill streak. And, of course, now also exists because of minion streak. So, okay, that cap kind of comes into effect. Also, if you really are snowballing, though, and you really are smashing them, you know what? Their minimum gold value is not quite so low. This means if you're actually inting on purpose, you're feeding more gold over. Okay, that's a thing. But also, because your gold bounty goes up by 100 per kill, it's probably a good idea that you can get your 100 gold per kill yourself. That seems fair. Sure, I think that's fine. Overall, gold income is going up, though, especially with cannon minis also spawning more frequently. Nerf to summoner TP can no longer be canceled. So if you are TPing to get someone off your turret because they're turret diving, you are leaving lane, and your opponent who chose to stay in lane is getting an advantage on you. So now, threatening a dive and forcing a TP, just threatening the dive, having so much pressure that you can threaten dives and force TP, is going to be more than, oh, well, we managed to force this 4-minute cooldown off of you. It's like, no. We managed to screw your solo lane. By threatening this dive, we bopped your other lane. Wow, that is a payoff. Also, if you're going for a super risky flank TP, maybe you kill yourself. But I think the dive threat thing is the really scary one, where now they're more hesitant to threaten the dive. But if your TPs are good, you're more rewarded. The channel duration is cut by 1/9. That's non-trivial. It matters. You get less time to react to it. Good TPs are going to be better. Safety TPs are going to be worse. Interesting knock-on effects. Minus stuff to the in-game stats panel. Stuff for the ranked season. You're going to show your ranked status more frequently. Lobby's going to show that kind of stuff as well. Some mission cleanup stuff. A bunch of various bug fixes, mostly for LeBlanc and her skins. New skins coming out to Sona skins. Sona? Wow. Leona skins. Camille, Lissandra, the Pajama Party. All really sweet stuff. Some chromas coming out as well. This is a very, very large patch. The TLDR, what a big patch. Here's the TLDR as best I can give it for the patch. It's not worth scrolling down on everything. Here's what it comes down to. Turrets are more lethal to champions on tower dives. Minions are more lethal and more durable overall. If left unattended, they will wreck turrets. The requirement to get Baron or even Inhibitor down is going down because minions are going to do more on their own. They're going to be harder to wave clear, and they're going to do more damage overall. That said, the early laning phase is going to be extended. It will be very much harder, more than or about twice as difficult, to knock down an outer turret before 14 minutes. It's going to require a lot of effort, and thus it probably won't happen very much. But if it does, that means you really, really snowballed there. Turret's going to protect champions better. Turret's going to stand up better. But once you get in a mid game, once that outer turret falls, you can start really blitzing down structures because your minion is going to stay alive for longer and deal more damage. It's just that dive's going to be more threatening. Overall gold bounties are up, so if the opponents are snowballing on you and you get a shutdown on them, you bring the gold a lot closer back to equal and you have a better chance at winning. Also, the first Drake picked up, the first elemental Drake of each kind per team is worth a lot more. Less buffed for Infernal, much more buffed for the other three. So contesting Drake is more valuable, even if you're the one who's behind, even if you're going for just, an 8-minute Cloud Drake, it's worth a lot more. It's worth contesting more frequently because it's going to give you more total power. That's ultimately the major changes that are really going to be gameplay impacting. There's some changes to runes, there's changes to champions here and there as well. It's worth reading all of them. Ultimately, what it comes down to, though, is it feels like lane bullies are going to be better at lane bullying. They're going to be rewarded with gold and scaling, but less with knocking the turret down. So they're going to be locked into that laning phase. They're not going to knock that turret down and go somewhere else. So you're going to be able to spend more time battling your opponent straight up. Your turret's going to be there to defend you. It's going to do more damage against your opponents. And we'll see what it all looks like when we start playing those games live. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be exciting. I'm excited for preseason. I'm excited for All-Stars, which will be played on either this or the next patch, which is coming in a couple of weeks. I'm excited for the season to start, and I'm assuming January when this all comes around. I think it's going to be very exciting games. We'll see if there's going to be required tuning coming in. Either way, it's going to be exciting, and I'll see you next time.